Thank you, one and all. It's really great to be here, and this is such a terrific thing that Tim has put together and his crew. It's really something I wished for at least 2.5 decades, that we would get the growers and the producers together, because this is really the nuts and bolts of where it starts. Yes, of course, the market and everything else is a very important part, but it's got to start somewhere, and this is where it starts. So, some quick information. I left the financial side of being involved in hemp in about 2017, and I set up the Warner Research Institute, which is a not-for-profit DGR registered, DGR meaning deductible gift recipient. In other words, someone puts in $10, they get a $10 tax deduction, to explore the bigger picture other than just hemp. Originally, I got into hemp because I was looking for bringing business back to the bush, because I wanted to create a situation where value adding was done regionally as much as possible to encourage jobs in the bush, business in the bush, and decentralise Australia. But we need a sustainable, renewable product to do so. Anyway, from that, hemp came, and that's another big story. There's always these big stories all over the place with how that happened. But presently, the primary objectives of the Warner Research Institute is to invest in research that is going to drive those 2 points that I put there. Now, question, Tim, are all PowerPoints available to anybody who wants them? Right? Yep, great, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these. They're pretty boring. Is that doing something? Huh, must be this way. So, yes, we've got 23 years of. Can I push a button? Hey, there we go. It's a short history of hemp processing in Australia, and it finishes at 2019. So I'm not going into a lot of the stuff that's happened here. I'll let you read all about that later on when you get a chance. There's right in the beginning, the major project that stepped forward was one in Tasmania, which was to do with native forest logging for paper, and that's when they imported seed from France and Hungary, and we grew Compulti and F77 and a few things like that. And it was at UTAS, University of Tasmania at Richmond Research Station there, that this crop was grown. It was quite a good crop, actually, but there was a lot of issues that came out of hemp as a fibre for pulp source. I won't go into that in any great detail. It did fail, but it will come back again when people specialise with what paper they're looking for. But simply, with all the systems they had, just hemp was a lot tougher than people realised. And I think that goes for a lot of the people who have anything to do with processing or harvesting. It's bloody tough stuff. It will break your equipment pretty easily. And so it wasn't for paper pulp in those days. And the question was, well, what do we do here? Where will it grow, number one, and what will we use to grow what seed? We can't just be importing seed all the time. And where will the government allow us to grow it? Well, there wasn't many places. In fact, my first real crops were on Norfolk Island, of all places, where I was importing seed from all around the world because they would allow it onto Norfolk Island. Then I would get a DPI guy from Queensland to fly over and sample the crops, because we couldn't grow them in Queensland, but to prove that they were below the threshold of THC, so we could actually bring then the seed onto Queensland to do stuff. It was a chaotic time. Where's the best location with soil and farming? So all these issues came up. What markets are there? Well, there wasn't a lot, but I tell you what, back then there was more markets than there are today. There was rope companies, there was non-woven companies, there was all sorts of places that we could go to sell the fibre. One time we were setting up to sell some hemp fibre to make cordage out of. By the time we got back to them with the required sample amount that they wanted to, they had actually sold the equipment to India and didn't want to do any natural fibre ropes anymore. So, I mean, this just happened time after time. It was just the way the world went. That was the first crop we grew in Queensland, actually, that one there. That was the precursor, the precursor to MS77. This one was called Iron SX. And then after that, we developed a CHG, and then after that, developed MS77, and there are others that you haven't heard about yet that'll come along. So these points here are all just points. I'm going to get onto the manufacturing. But we had to go and look for places that did manufacture hemp. And so that meant getting on your bike and going somewhere. And one of the places was, of course, Europe, Western Europe mainly. Eastern Europe was sort of a pretty labour-intensive, old-type system, very slow approach. Very good quarry product, but very slow, just not to the standards we were looking at. Europe was good, very good, lots of mills, all that sort of stuff. I think I've seen in Europe about 25 different milling systems, and they are all slightly different. But I'll go into that later. And so the point was, do we do it ourselves, reinvent the wheel, which is what exists elsewhere, go and check out what's there, or do we both? We'll reinvent and we'll take parts from somewhere else to put the first mill in. So as you can see, this is a bit of the European type model. They're very long lines. They usually deal in round bales. We did analysis of round bales, all the energy that goes into chopping them up, all the energy. For example, if you do a round bale, you've got to go onto the field to pick it up and put it on a trailer. You've got to carry it somewhere and house it somewhere. Then that means you've got to take it off. And once you've taken it off, then someone comes along to take it to the mill, so you've got to put it back on a truck. And then that truck goes to the mill, it's going to be taken off again. And then it's ready to process, you've got to take it off again and move it there. We worked out another way. And that was only by accident we did that. So in China, of course, there's all sorts of things. This little system there, which is their breakers, and they do hand stripping, they do all sorts of things. The fibres were actually steam separated rather than using traditional retting. There's all sorts of things over there, and these little blue things down here were sort of like duvexes, which I'll explain later. But the summary was, where can we draw this, what can we draw from the experience that we've had? And a lot of it was, for example, in China, I was invited over there. They thought I had some technology to give them, and for some reason, I don't know why. And one of the big things was that the government in China had made a decree that they wanted to be able to clothe, feed, fuel, everything within China's boundary from resources within China. And they wanted to look for, other than the normal traditional sources for oil and whatever else, is to look for an agricultural source. And I remember going into this 6-story building in Beijing, big sign saying, "Welcome Phil Warner," blah, 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 blah. And we went right up to the top floor and we walked down a hallway. And in that hallway, either side of the hallway is all these plants that they tried. So there's this one on Canaf, and there was this one on flax, this one on such and such, and this one on such and such. And then we got to the end and they did both sides in hemp and said, "Hemp is it." And I walked into a meeting room, which would be bigger than this room here, with a big table in the middle. And all these women army officers sat down, and an interpreter and me, and they started quizzing me about what it was. But around us was all the products they'd developed. And once again, that's another presentation, another time. But it was amazing to see what they had achieved in the desire to make hemp or use hemp as a resource for their industrial world, but also for their military. So back in Australia, the first lot of stuff was out of Dalby, really. I mean, Sean's here, your uncle grew some of the first crops, but this is later on. And we're looking at these windrows, and I'm thinking, what happened in France when I was checking out the LCDA's mill? They had these lovely round bells, but being typically French, they had a guillotine in there somewhere. And this had a twin blade. And it came down on these round bales, and it chopped it. All this energy going, and then it would chop straight through this thing, and it would fall all over the place onto a conveyor. Then it would go up to a 600 horsepower hammer mill decorticator. Now, of course, it wasn't nice and even. It would go in, and this machine would get a big lump go in, and then it'd get up to speed again, and then a little bit would go through, and it'd be eaten really quickly, and then another big lump would go in. And I was looking out further, and they took me through, and I said, what's going on out here? And we've got 6 Duvexes. Ask me later what a Duvex is, but it's sort of like a trommel in reverse. And they said, yeah, well, because it comes out inconsistently, because the hammer mill decorticator, really didn't do a good job when it had big lumps or small lumps. It was better if it was evenly fed. So I'm standing there out of Dalby, and I'm looking at this windrow. I'm saying, no, we're going to bring our decorticator into the field, get rid of the dust, because it was just like the dust in these things is just amazing. We'll run our decorticator through there, and we'll just handle it in bulk. Now, it's easy to feed, done. So that's what we set off. But at the same time, there was a guy in Europe thinking the same sort of thing. Oh, this is the Dalby mill. That's how we handled it. We made cotton modules out of it. We fed it in with a cotton handling equipment. It went up a conveyor. It went through this trommel here, which did its job, shaker tables, all that sort of stuff. So it's a very crude example. As you can see from here, we actually used an old module maker to get it up there so the stuff would fall down. And it was in an open shed. We learnt about moisture control because we didn't have any. We would be able to get sort of like 1.5 tonne an hour through when it was dryish, but as soon as it got wet, moisture outside of humidity increased, it buggered the whole system. So moisture in the atmosphere was a major contributor. So this is back a while ago. And just very quickly, because I'm meant to finish in 20 or 10 minutes or something, that was the sort of design of it. But we also had another issue, which was transporting materials greater than 50 kilometres to a central machine was always going to be an issue. And we wanted to sort of overcome that. And I'd been in Canada, and there's a paper company called Moitse sur Dieu, which uses the flax straw for paper. And they had a relocatable mill. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. If we make it simple enough, we can put it on a farm and just do whatever there for the grower and then move that thing and do it again there and do it again there. We could be hundreds of kilometre radius, 200 kilometres radius. So that was the cost of this one. It cost about 250K, 1 to 2 hours, 2-man operation. Products were quite good, horse bedding and hempcrete, short fibre for hydro seeding and mulch, refined fibres for textiles and tree mats. Right, anyhow, so this is the relocatable design, which we never got to build, but it was really 5 containers and some conveyors, which would all fit on semis, go out to locations, sit there. We'd feed it in with a micro telehandler from the decorticated material that was done in field into there, and presto, it was the same equipment as you saw in the shed. So we had product on farm. This is another guy that was happening at the same time, Australian Flax Company. They bought this machine from England, and it was part of a research project in England for hemp and flax. And it worked quite well, but it was very slow, but that went out of business because there just wasn't the market there, because at this time in 2006 and earlier, there was we were talking about it last night, the textile, leather and footwear industry rejuvenation program, when what was it called? Yeah. So they're trying to ease everybody out of losing their job, and we were trying to find ways of putting product in. And actually at that stage, most of the entities that we had been aiming at, such as Fibre, who made non-woven matting and all those sorts of things, they left the country. I mean, who was it? Smith family and United Bonded, and anyhow, there were companies out there that were interested in these fibres, but they all started to disappear one after another. So we've lost a lot of the industries that used to use these fibres. But these guys did produce. That was our fibres, the long one there. Those are the one at the bottom. The flax fibre as compared to the hemp fibre. So at that same stage, I ran into Dun Agro, well before, actually, and we started to talk the same language, and we sort of decided to do a bit of a cooperative development here. I'm in Australia, he's in Holland. And we started to work on similar systems and find out how they worked. And we'd swap information, and hey presto. So he liked our concept of harvesting because he was doing the same thing. He liked our concept of processing in field because it made it easier to put through the mill, and you had more consistency of flow. And so we got together on a number of things. Now that red one there is a bit later. That's called the Cannibal. It's an old potato harvester that we put a seed head on here for just ripping as much seed and leaf off as possible, and then the bottom one for cutting it into windrows and cutting it into billets of 600 long. This is just straight fibre crop going straight into it. And that's raking. Now we improved on that raking a lot too, because it was all in the preparation before getting to mill that makes it work. And then Dun Agro was using this form as well, as we were using cotton modules. They were just processing in field. You can see all the dust coming off there. We don't do that. That doesn't happen in the mill because that bit's happened out in the field, which is where all that microbial material should settle and help feed the next crop. And then we would put it into buns here. That they would sit there possibly 1, 2, 3 years, no problem at all. A big sand platform to start with, so there was no moisture wicking up, and we would just leave it there like that and go and collect it when we wanted to. Dun Agro was a very much bigger setup. He had a whole, we didn't try and follow this, although I became a partner of Dun Agro. But this mill is second to none in the world, in my view. Produces terrific fibre. I'll go into that in a second. But this whole system has very few moving parts. It's rolling drums more than anything else. Therefore, the maintenance was very low. It's pressurised. It's got a special air pressure in there to make sure that the air is dried out before it goes in there, so we have a consistent product that would be processed the same way. We do clean up the fibre. That's a visual of it, 3D. That's some more information on it. It flows down, it collects the herd, different herds in different places. And that was our finished products there, herd over here, and different bales, different product here, all stored, automated. There was only 3 men running the whole thing. And that was the sort of standards we developed for the European market, different grades for paper, automotive, non-woven textiles, even going right through to the finer one down here, this one, which is class 10, which was almost ready for textile usage. Now, we numbered each, back in Australia, we numbered each module. We used the module tagging system they have in cotton so that we could actually know which ones were processing which way. In other words, if they processed easily and we got a fine fibre out of it, we would seek to get all those modules through in one run, because then we wouldn't have to alter the equipment. Because as soon as you keep on changing where your source comes from, it's grown slightly differently, it's had different retting, it's all that sort of stuff, you've got to change your system again. You've got to tweak things. So once we got it right for one sort of crop, we kept it going and did all that crop. So numbering our modules was important. The same as with Dun Agro, we used to number our buns. So about 10 million euros, they could get that. They raised the money. It was hair raising. I was sort of part of getting that happening. It was a 3-man operation, blah, blah, blah. You'll read all that later on. So back in Australia, we then imported the machines to do this. So we used this 4 metre cut in the field, which meant, getting through 4 metres. Mind you, that's not by any stretch the tallest crop. We had crops that were right over the hill, over the top of this thing here, where you couldn't see where you're going. So the driver, when he got to the end, all of a sudden blurst out into clear country, but the rest of the time he's just looking at green stuff falling all over the place. And then we would windrow it, but we'd use this particular rake, which once again we developed in Holland, so then we developed it in Australia. It was an inverter rake, so it has a grass pick up front, went onto a conveyor belt, turned it over, and that meant it dried quicker and better. And then we would use a grass pick up front, take out some blades in the forage system there, and we would separate the herd and fibre in there, but it came out as a bulk, and then we would put it in modules. And sometimes we then went further on and copied what Albert was doing, and we made our own buns. And one of those buns did last us 5 years. It was just in fantastic nick, but we put the sand down. Got to put the sand down just to stop that moisture wicking up. And then we sort of copied some of Albert's stuff. We did our own, but this, I think Gary's got this part. Wherever you, Gary, somewhere. Yeah, yeah, you got that bit, didn't you? Yeah, and yeah, for sure. And this was our first. Well, we kept on hitting the roof every time we went to put some stuff in there. There's lots of things. They're big, great. I mean, that's inside looking at the way it would. This is where the fibre went, and then went down that way. But that was just to separate and feed, so there's a consistent flow. And that's a sort of another example of it. As simple as we could get, make it really simple, stupid, whatever. The feeding device, this broke it up so that, because that had a conveyor in it, moved what was in there down to this machine here, sent up the conveyor through here. It was hard to call it. It was a box that actually pulled the fibre away from the herd, so it fed in at one rate and was pulled through at a much faster rate. So that stripped it, and then the herd would fall through here onto this, go up onto the shaker table, the fibre would go out and away into a product there. And that enabled us to make some interesting products. That's just another view. I mean, we ducted everything by air. All the materials went by air, down there, big room, fill up the room and then go and get it bagged. These were the products. So the shaker table enabled us to manage, all in one go, is to clean up the, not very nice photographs, but clean up the dust, get the dust out of the small herd, which we use that for bioremediation. That was pet bedding, and this was horse bedding and hemp cream. And that was fibre. That went off to cotton gins for a little bit of attention, and that went straight into a stick machine, which meant we were really seeking to pull these little bits of herd out. First stage. But just a couple of other products, guys. We talked about horse bedding, we talked about all these sorts of things, but what we found in this one here was these plates had a certain amount of oil on them. And we put the hemp on, and we let it sit there, then we moved it away and waited for 10 minutes. This is what they use now for oil absorbency. It's cotton trash. There's other versions of this. We did the same thing with this, and we made a little hole, and all the oil leached out. Shit to a blanket. This is what this does. It's one of the best oil absorbency products you can get. That's just another alternative. Every petrol station, every mining unit, every truck company, whatever it is, have all got to have spill kits, and they sell them for a fortune. So that's another product that you may not have heard of. worthwhile thinking about in different circumstances. We also did a fair bit of work with hydroseeding, and we used the really fine fibre for that. And that you buy, I've got to shut up, have I? No, you buy, why am I telling a secret? The hydroseeding, they usually use straw or some rubbish like that, which really doesn't work. It stops erosion. You use the fibre, you throw it into a specific type of blender, you add water, tackifier, seed, bit of green dye, and you go and spray it on the sides of roads or wherever to stop the erosion and promote the growth. Now, they're importing that from New Zealand and America for a small bag, just I think it's about 15 kilos for about $25, $30. You work that out. It's just short fibre bagged up. It's nearly $3,000 a tonne. And we've got it here. It's another opportunity out there for someone who wants to develop it. But it does require a specific machine to pump it on. Not anyone can do it. Keeping moving.
Real fast.
Real fast. Oh, everybody else has been talking for ages. You'll read that. We talk about value chains. That's my version. But here's the real crux of this business here that we're all talking about. This is what I call the industry shelf. It starts off with the DNA of your product, your seed. And it ends up here with your material science. Not a lot goes into this at the moment. We need a bit more in there, but it's all about how you license it, seed stock, seed supply, farm agronomy and harvesting, product handling. Biggest thing, bigger than decortication is your product handling and storage. Guys, if you've got 5,000, you multiply it out, 5,000 tonnes, 10,000 tonnes, multiply that in dimension, that's the storage you need. Book on processing, value-adding technologies, product development, market dynamics. I hope that a Hemp CRC gets some of this done. It would be terrific because it takes all of that to make it work. Thank you.